The Human Jeshua, The Early Years. March 2014. Beloved one, would you like to hear about my life? I will tell you about my early life 2,000 years ago. I often hear your questions, wanting to know, what was your life like? Was it truly as recorded in the Holy Scriptures? Partly, yes, and partly a bit different, because you each have your reality as you understand your hologram and your reality, and others may look at your life and may see it differently than you do. My truth, lowercase t, is the story that I am going to share with you. It is how I understood that lifetime and how I understand that lifetime now. That incarnation truly began even before there was form, because it extended, as your lifetimes extend, back in ancestry, back in what I term a lineage of thought, so that when I took upon myself form as the infant, I already had a history. I already had history of off-planet lineage, because yes, I did travel in what you now would identify as spaceships, and I was part of what you would understand to be the extraterrestrial, because I did not live all of my lifetimes upon Holy Mother Earth. I have lived several lifetimes upon Holy Mother Earth because she is a beautiful being, but there were lifetimes, incarnations of different form, that were upon other celestial beings, planets you would call them. The form of incarnation was different according to whatever planetary mass I was upon. There were times when I used the energy of mind to travel what you would now understand to be great distances in space. So before I came to be with Mary and Joseph, I had a great lineage of experience, as you do, and there are times in what you call your present lifetime when you call upon the experience that would be otherworldly. Sometimes you wonder, how did I know that? Well, you knew that because it is deep within your soul. There was agreement that I would have incarnation at a certain time of conflict. You have history of how the Jewish people were split into divisions as to religion, how the one God should be worshipped, and there were very strict rules. Then you had the Essenes who were part of the Jewish culture and lineage, but they were much more into the spiritual understanding of what you would now term metaphysics, beyond the physical, because there was a history, again, a lineage for them of masters who had given a roadmap and some directions. And then you had the Romans, of course, very much into power and domination. Not all of them, but the collective consciousness wanted to be seen as very strong leaders, in control. You have the descendants of the Romans in this day and time, and you know the ones of which I speak. So there was agreement that I would take incarnation at that time and come into a world not so very different from what you have in this day and time, where there was divisiveness, and where there was love among people who were close to each other in the family units, and yet even divisiveness within family units, the same as you have in this time. My birth was, on the worldly plane, very normal. I was born of woman the way you were. I had in my knowing and understanding that physicality is not all that there is, and I lived as the infant more expanded beyond the physical. There was a grouping of friends, old friends, who did not need words to communicate with each other, and they knew that I was coming. They knew that we had traveled together in many other lifetimes as well, so they came to welcome me, the wise men, the magi, as they are called. Magical in the true sense of going beyond the physical. They knew that I had come to live a lifetime that would be as an example. Now, it was not all written out in the scripting ahead of time. In fact, most of my life, as yours, was open to improv. That is why I speak of improv so often. It was open to choice as to when and how, and what I would choose. It was most interesting. For the first few years I grew as little human boys grow, and I was quite happy to be with body and very happy to be beyond the body, because I knew, as your small ones, many of them in this day and time, understand that they are not just the body. Yes, the body will scream, and they will scream when they are hungry or if they are uncomfortable or if they need something. The infant has not yet learned the sound of language that is of the culture that they are born into, and so they do the vocalization which always gets attention and they get taken care of. I did the same. You have the story of our sojourn in Egypt for a while, and then we returned to Nazareth, and my father Joseph took up carpentry once again. I was very fortunate having a Jewish mother who had many friends. She was very outgoing, still is. She had many women friends with small children who also had had the guidance to go away for a while until it was safe to return, and so I had plenty of playmates and I never lacked for companionship. I played, I climbed trees, I jumped into the flowing water, I swam. Not as good as my cousin John, because he was 9 months older than I, and also of a different physique, although I grew to be over 6 feet tall. I learned the trade of carpentry from my father Joseph. It was a good trade to know, but I knew that was not my true complete calling. When I was 7 I went to study with my beloved friend and teacher, the one known as Judith, in the Essene grouping which lived at Mount Carmel. She was one of my teachers, but not the only one. How we studied in those days was to read and copy the ancient writings that had been left to us from other centuries of understanding. So dutifully I did the same. I read and copied, and in the copying we were taught to speak the words as we were writing, so that the information went in very deeply, using all of the physical senses. We also were taught to tune into the masters who wrote the manuscripts, masters that I saw to be from a long time ago. Now, of course, they were right there present, because there is no separation. So they were guiding me as well as the physical teachers. There were times when I was very interested in what I was copying and reading. It was like, oh, really? The same as you would feel if you were reading something that had been written centuries before and had been copied by those masters from other masters seemingly, as you understand a lineage of time, linear time. There were exciting things to study, and then there were other things that I just was not interested in, the same as when you go to school and you have certain subjects that get you really excited about, and some others you do just because you have to. I was very interested in certain aspects, one of them being the oneness of all life and knowing at a very deep level that all life is connected by energy and through energy. I knew this as a small child, 3, 4 years of age, when I came across a bird that had been rather short-sighted and had flown into the trunk of a tree rather than landing on a branch. I call him short-sighted. He was a bit knocked out, looked to be dead. My playmate said, "Don't bother with that one. It's dead. Just kick it into the ditch and leave it there." But I felt that there was still life. There is always life. So I picked up the bird and held it in my hand, and I could feel, even though the appearance was of releasement of the body, that this one could be called back, the same as later when there was a calling of Lazarus to come forth out of the tomb. Life in form is always there if there is willingness and the connection of oneness. So I cupped the bird in my hand, and after a while there was a bit of a flutter. The bird looked up at me, and I would say that it smiled and flew away. My playmates were a bit surprised, but they said, "Oh, well, he just knocked himself out, and the warmth of your hand brought him back to life." Belief varies. But he came back, and I do think he smiled. My playmates did not see the smile and they did not really care, because we were in the middle of playing a game with the ball. I wonder where that game originated. Perhaps there was a time back in the lineage when ones, as the master creators that we are, thought to catch a sun and to toss it somewhere and to bring forth a new planetary system. So as a young boy I had plenty of playmates, some of whom were interested in the same things that I was. Others were not. But after I went to the Essene community, the ones there were more tuned to the expandedness, I am not going to call it higher or lower, but I am going to call it expanded understanding of life and of energy. They were the ones with whom I grew up from the age of 7 to 12, studying with the Essenes the ancient manuscripts, the energy of nature, being out in nature, sitting by the flowing water and perceiving it as liquid energy and feeling the rush of that energy, watching the plants that grew along the stream, and watching the ones that were in the water, how they would bend when there was quite a rush of water coming, like in your season of springtime. There would be a great rush of water, and we watched the reeds as they would bend and not break. There was a perception in that if you stand your ground and you say, "This is how it has to be," and you take your knocks, saying, "Well, I am very strong, and this is what I believe, and you're not going to knock it out of me, okay? That is one way to go. But if you are like the reed that can bend with the water, you do not take the knocks and the bruises. I learned that. I took a few knocks and I understood bruises. Also, as a small one, 2 years old, I remember running and falling down. You have nowadays the paved roads. We had just the natural road, and sometimes there were rocks and outcroppings, and you could fall down, and I did, and I scraped my knee. Not very pleasant. I ran to my mother and cried, I hurt my knee, and being a good Jewish mother, she knew how to make it better. She would put a certain salve on it, but it was not the salve that helped it heal. It was what she did with the energy of the hand on the knee and the knowing that it was going to heal. That is where your healing comes from. Any kind of healing comes from the belief and the knowing that healing can happen, that it is happening, that it is very much in process. Even as it shows some evidence of being otherwise, it is very much in process, because there is a very strong ingrained belief in time from generational teaching, a belief in time and a belief in process. Now, in truth, there does not have to be process. It can be instant. That is why you can have the instantaneous healing that is written about in your scriptures. But there is such a deeply held belief in time and the process of time, from what is called beginning through the middle to the completion, that ones feel that there has to be a process to everything. That is okay, but it can also be speeded up. You can do what you call the fast forward. You do the fast forward when you look forward to the future and you say, I can see myself strong and healthy. I can see myself walking, functioning easily. With any kind of physical challenge you can put yourself forward to a time when you know healing, when you see yourself being whole and being able to do whatever you want to do with no problem of the body. The problem is not there in the future. It is gone, and you can have the healing now. If you ever wonder about healing, or if any of your friends come and ask about healing, have them look forward maybe a year, 2 years, whatever time period they choose, and see themselves whole, and know that they are going to grow into it, that is going to be their reality. Maybe they do not feel it at the present time, but say 3 months, 6 months, any time you choose, there is no judge who says it has to be 2 years, 3 months, 6 days, 10 hours, whatever, just put yourself forward into that time and see yourself whole. At the age of 12, you have the story in your scriptures where we made caravan, my mother and father Joseph and some of the neighbors and friends, and went to the temple in Jerusalem, because I was coming of age, you see. I was 12, becoming a man. So I went and did what you call now my bar mitzvah and became a man. Then I had questions. Well, I mean, after all, here I was a man. I should know all the answers, so I felt I must find out from the ones who knew everything, including all the answers. So I had questions, and I asked, and I got answers. But the answers were not always what I knew to be true. I knew there was something more. But the ones of authority said, no, this is how it is. This is what I've been taught. This is how it is. You think you are a man, but you are just coming into being a man. So I took their answers under advisement and I discussed with them as much as they would discuss. They really were not too interested in knowing anything more than what they already knew, but we had some good discussions. You have the story of how my mother and father searched everywhere for me within the caravan as they were heading home. I was still in discussions. They came back for me, and I said unto them, did you not know that I have to be about my father's business? In other words, I have to find out all I can from the ones who supposedly know. I have to be here. Now that I am a man, I have to know the answers. And they said, okay, but tell us first if you are going to stay longer, as most parents would say. You see, in some ways it was a very normal upbringing, and I was very, very lucky to have Mary as my mother, a great Jewish mother. She knew all of the laws of Jewish culture, and she also knew the metaphysical, as did my father, Joseph. Then it was time for me to study abroad. I had studied with the Essene community at Mount Carmel, and I had visited with the masters at Qumran and read the manuscripts there. I had read and copied, I had spoken, I had read out loud all of the ancient manuscripts, and I had questioned the priests at the temple, but I wanted to know more. So I set out in a caravan with the camels to travel abroad to study with masters in other lands. It was an exciting time for me. It was a scary time, because now I was a man. Now it was time for me to go out on my own. But, you know, home looked really, really good to me, and I was not really sure, but it was arranged that I would go, and so I did. I had more questions and I got more answers. I met most wonderful healers and teachers, and ones who had come through the same process of questioning and seeking and finally finding their truth, and they shared with me their truth. Now, you have the rest of the story written in your holy scriptures about how I collected to myself the 12 disciples, except that there were more than 12 and they were not all males. In our next message we will cover that part of my life. To be continued. Yeshua ben Joseph, Jesus. Channeled through Judith Coates. www.oakbridge.org